Please welcome Michael Denzler, Senior Leader at Zühlke Engineering Austria, Alice Schmidt, Advisor and the author of The Sustainable Puzzle, Benjamin Mörzinger, co-founder of Nista.io, Nate Wyne, co-founder and CEO of Floodlight, and he's back on stage, our AI expert for everything, as he named himself, Clemens Wasner. Clemens, thanks for jumping in. To be honest, this panel should be accompanied by Lisa Höllbacher. She unfortunately fell ill. So all the best, and we wish her a speedy recovery. Thank God that you're flexible, and we're looking forward to an interesting discussion that is accompanied by you.
Thank you. So yeah, others just fell ill. You have to endure my moderation. So be aware. Yeah, before we, let's say, dive into the questions and so on, I think because most of the audience, I would assume is not familiar with what your companies are doing. So perhaps each of you could make, let's say, a TLDR, 1 to 2 sentences. What is your company doing in the area of AI sustainability or your organization? So let's start with Nate, the great.
Yeah, I'm Nate Wyne. We're Floodlight. We use satellites and sensors and then AI to interpret the data to measure greenhouse gas emissions and calculate climate risk.
Yeah, my name is Benjamin. I'm one of the founders of Nista. We develop an AI energy co-pilot that helps us to provide all-in-one energy management to industrial manufacturing companies.
Hi, my name is Alice Schmidt, and I've been working for 25 years at the intersection of the environment, social sustainability, and business. And in the last few years, I've been taking AI as well on board. And I consult, I teach at the university, and I help businesses basically see the bigger picture.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Mick. I'm from Zühlke. So Zühlke is an innovation provider in engineering and consulting for companies across the globe, focused also on Europe. And we help basically bring innovation into sustainability so that we can manage this sustainability change as a whole society.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, for the first round of questions, I would like to dive into the economic opportunity at the intersection of AI and sustainability, because let's say for outsiders or people that are not that familiar with the topic, it always sounds like, a little bit of greenwashing, or maybe this might be some small businesses. But at the same time, if you read reports from, let's say, Goldman Sachs calculated that just to decarbonize the European electricity grid, coming from, let's say, all layers of the grid, you would need to spend the equivalent of Italy's GDP over the next 30 years. So this is just to put this into perspective just for Europe. And so, having 2 startup representatives on the stage, could you elaborate a little bit of the market you're actually working in, and let's say how big is this opportunity that you're tackling?
Sure. So a lot of where we operate is RegTech, so CSRD, CBAM, a lot of the other regulations coming out of Brussels are major points of concern for CEOs, CFOs, boards, and they're spending a lot of money on getting those reports correct. And so we see that market, just calculating it easily in the tens and 20s of billions this year, and then doubling probably every 5, because we believe the European Commission is going to continue to lower the bar from now at 40 million euros a year to 20 million and so on. That will all be under the umbrella as it is of CSRD. And if those numbers are incorrect, the penalties are 4% of EBITDA. So that's death to any C-suiter.
Cool. Then.
Yeah, order-wise, it's pretty much the same. So our market is energy management systems. You would have to look at those companies that we target, which are industrial manufacturing companies, and then make the energy management market a bit smaller so that you can actually talk about our market. Nevertheless, the numbers for the energy management market have already been rather high in 2019, and everything that happened since then has helped to increase this market. The demand for proper energy management solutions has been increasing in the past few years, not just in Europe, but globally. So also in the order of billions and rapidly increasing.
So before I come to research and Alice, a quick question to Michael, because here we have 2 representatives from VC, so venture capital backed or funded startups. which industry opportunities is your company or your teams at Zühlke tackling? And what is typically the expectation of the client in terms of, let's say, energy savings or CO2 reduction or hard euros at the end of the day?
Yeah. So we are tackling, I think, two different business problems or business opportunities. One is the regulative, also with CSRD very strong in Europe, which just has to be fulfilled. But we also see it as a chance to go beyond pure reporting. So we see CSRD as a chance to get transparency into the data, to go away from greenwashing and really get the data foundation, find interesting solution that solve the customer's problems, but also go beyond the technology to also do the change management in the organization. The other one is we try to help companies to create innovative products. So we have consultants, for example, also in the space of circular economy, which is also a big, I think, business potential and a big also potential to apply AI because this often go hand in hand. The demand for data is growing with circular economy.
Cool. So last but not least, first
before you even ask, I would like to say something about the business case, because yes, the business case is very clear and the business case for sustainability is very clear, and it's great that companies are able to make money by helping other companies to reduce their impact, right? That's excellent, and I could mention other examples from other sectors. But I think one thing to really understand is also that unsustainability per se comes with a dramatic cost that we all have to bear. When we talk about climate change only, the costs of preventing or mitigating climate change are actually much, much lower than the costs of not acting, by a factor of 6. So it costs 6 times more money to not do anything because climate change is already destroying GDP. What was your question?
The answer was 42. No, but you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I can only agree with what you just said. However, I talked about, let's say, 100, probably even more, decision makers in manufacturing companies, mainly in Austria and Germany. And the amount of awareness for what you just said, which is correct, is sub-zero. So hardly any, we tried arguing that GDP is destroyed, and we tried to argue that CO2 emissions are expensive and that energy prices are becoming more important, and all of that stuff. However, whenever I talk to any manufacturing company and really decision makers in there, you can only argue about the prices and the cost in consequence. And it's really, really interesting to see how far we are, in at least my very limited perspective, from actually adhering to the scientific facts that should lead our society to really significantly change how we, in my case, operate our manufacturing plants. It's ridiculous, and it's certainly going to hurt us badly in the next few years if we continue to question every sustainability effort by what is the hard number and what is the ROI, and can we argue that it's going to pay back in 2 months' time. I mean, this is just ridiculous, and that's very much the fact still.
Thank you for that. I love that. Can I come in just on one thing? Because I think the solution is true cost. True cost means basically that companies price in and do not externalize, and they will have to do that, right? Due to regulation by the EU, by Austria. So that will come, that is coming, it's already there to an extent. And so the companies that actually start taking action early are in the lead. They're going to save cost as well, right? Because at the moment, I mean, we're paying what, 30, 35 euro for a ton of carbon, right? I mean, that's way too little. The societal costs are somewhere near 700. Some people say, well, it's only 200. That's where we will get. And that's when it will really pay off for companies to have saved energy, among other things.
But the cost discussion right now, what's the ROI is difficult, but that's why I also have customers, for example, I remember a banking customer 2 months ago, a sustainability manager saying, I'm happy there's CSRD. because this gives a value to sustainability. And now we have to bring in this transparency of how sustainable are we, and this gives me the chance to say how sustainability can help creating revenue to my bank. So we can help them to position, I don't know, green mortgages proactively, and this increases their business potential.
Mm-hmm. And there's a book for that. Now, see, finally, I can make the intro. Now, because what is interesting about this topic, I mean, I don't know how many green tech waves there have been. I think more than quantum computing waves already. So I'm 44. I think this is now the fourth or fifth green tech wave I hear about. What is different, in my opinion, this time is of course, you have the very large players, but you also have lots of small players, and that the innovation happens both on the regulatory side, which is mandated by the governments across the globe, like CO2 auditing and so on, but it also goes in the direction of, let's say, cost reduction. And this is, let's say, here you have the immediate incentive alignment coming from the industries. I think this is also what Benjamin mentioned. The companies don't care about the big mission, at least outside of the marketing department, they don't care about it. But if you show them hard euros and cents that you can reduce, they're immediately there. So this was a very long intro for the book question. You're dealing with this topic from a research side for, you mentioned, 20 plus years. How do you see the current wave of green entrepreneurship also represented on this stage versus previous waves?
So I must say that I have been writing books, including this, but also the sustainability puzzle. But I have actually been mostly working in practice, though what I have been working on is not just with businesses, even though I have a business background, but also with the UN, United Nations, NGOs, and that has enabled me to really see this bigger picture. So in terms of waves, I mean, I see there's a lot of hypes, and I think all of these hypes tend to bring some positive tools, some positive ideas for sustainability, but they're not utilized. Yeah? And this hype, it's not a hype, right? I mean, AI is there, it's changing our world, whether we want it or not. And I think the opportunities are there. This is a massive game changer. It could be a massive game changer even for sustainability, if we really want it. And that depends on who owns the models, right? Who develops the models. It used to be universities. Now it's mostly companies. We know big tech firms are more powerful than entire nation states, right? I mean, if you compare market capitalization and GDP, that's a big one. And I'd just like to give the example of Google and Microsoft. Google and Microsoft are both companies that used to be, well, that still are. They still have very ambitious climate goals, carbon reduction goals. They're, of course, two of these very big ones, and Microsoft even has a goal to go carbon negative by 2030. Yeah? And that's great. Of course, this plays into the business model with direct air capture, etc. But in the last 3-4 years, with the AI boom, they've actually not only not reduced their emissions, they've raised them by 30 to 50% respectively. And that's a big thing. That's called the Jevons paradox. Yeah? So the more efficient something becomes, the more of it we use. Yeah? And that's been true 150 years ago at the start of the Industrial Revolution. And it's true now. And so we can manage this, but we really have to manage it. And that's why we need to see the bigger picture.
Thank you. Speaking of incentive alignment, where do you see, coming from the United States and now Vienna transplant, where do you see the biggest difference in the approach of commercializing AI green tech between the States and the EU? And maybe also elaborate a little bit why we had the opportunity to welcome you in Vienna at the open shop here.
Yeah. I mean, to answer your last question, the Vienna Business Agency had reached out to us, and we were dating London, Amsterdam, and Berlin as places to set up our first European headquarters. And VBA looked at us and said, look, Vienna wants to be the sustainability capital of the world. We have a lot of focus groups here, a lot of the educational focus and business focus would be here, come take a tour. And the market and the connectivity here really blew the competitors out of the way. So we set up our GmbH here last year for that. But to your question on the profitability side, I really see in the US, there's a lot more of the C-suite, CEOs, CFO, et cetera, that are getting part of their annual bonus tied to sustainability directives. So 10, 15% of if you get a €100,000 bonus, it would be tied to you being able to deliver on a sustainability goal, like path to net zero by 2030 or whichever else. What I see in Europe is there's a lot more focus on an actual number. And unfortunately, in the US, it's a lot more beautiful websites, and there's a little kid holding a flower in front of a windmill. But there's just not a lot of doing because it's mostly virtue signaling. So specifically with the US election coming, that's going to be a big indication as to which way my country is going to look at this, because one candidate has a pretty strong green agenda, the other one is pretty much the opposite for it. But I think what CSRD did is it really said, we don't care what happens to the politics. If you want to sell here, you have to confirm this. So I see, similar to your point, the companies that will be profitable on this are the ones that already have realized the train has left the station. Instead of pretending to play politics one way or the other, this is already gone, and you won't survive as a company in 10 years if you don't think sustainability is part of true risk management.
So now a question actually for each of you. I mean, we talked a lot about, let's say, energy optimization, carbon auditing, and so on. So there is definitely a boom going on. But in your experience, which areas are still underserved, or where would you have expected a green tech solution, but it has not manifested yet?
I would probably go manufacturing, but that's more.
I mean, my answer to that is energy management has been around for quite a while, and it's far from being an underserved market. It's just the way it is served is very, very bad. So it's something that doesn't help manufacturing companies at all, what they see in the market. And this is where technology comes in, and also our way of doing energy management, which is in large parts technologically driven. It's much more customer-oriented. It's much more oriented towards the needs of the people that are actually operating within the plant. So even though it's far from being an underserved market, energy management as a whole, the way people used to be doing it is just so practical that we still can get new customers and yeah, make them more successful than they have been. So maybe I'm not even the best person to ask that, but because I'm very much focused on energy management. So even in overserved market, you would argue a new and innovative solution can really make a change.
Yeah, no, but this is a very interesting insight, because people read that energy management companies exist for construction, for manufacturing, and so on. But at the end of the day, what is actually implemented and the savings that are generated are, let's say, several orders of magnitude smaller than what you would have expected.
Yeah, just briefly add to that. Energy management is not a piece of technology. It's something that you have to include into your daily operations. It just makes energy a thing that you care about, like human resources or the materials that you buy. It's nothing that inherently needs technology. However, if your manufacturing plant becomes complex enough, technology will be something that you will need. And so what comes more and more is that people realize that, and that spreadsheets and telephone and email are not enough to really drill down on the last few % of savings that you need to realize in order to adhere to CSRD. And this is where solutions like ours come in now.
So, brief follow-up, was the, let's say, energy price situation, let's call it like this,
yeah,
since February, was this a tailwind for your business? And
sure.
How did it manifest? Let's say, were the goals becoming more ambitious, or were the people desperate, like you were selling ice cream on the beach, to even get the project with you done?
So most of my days talking to customers, and I could book my vacations based on the energy future market. So if it goes down, then I have free time, and if it goes up, then today I can be here because the energy price is relatively low again. So definitely there is a very strong correlation, especially in the short-term oriented companies that we talk to. The real interesting customers that we have are the ones that care about what happens in 10 years. And those are the ones that also don't look at the energy price changes too much, because it's just it becomes more volatile. It changes over the day in the order of 5 times the energy price. At times you get even money when you get energy from the network. So those that are not really our customers care a lot about energy price. Those that really are our customers take care about what happens with their company in the next 5 to 10 years. We are very lucky enough that the majority of companies in Austria is still of the latter category, and those will need energy management, proper energy management that really helps them to become sustainable.
And who will manage the energy management? Now, because you mentioned the Jevons paradox before, this is, we have this with the roads. If you make a road wider, it will lead to more traffic jam. And the Microsoft phenomenon now culminates in Google and Microsoft procuring their own nuclear power plants. So this is like as extreme as it gets when it comes to power consumption. That would be a question to the two of you. How do you see, let's say, which countermeasures are already, let's say, getting started or will be necessary to deal with this situation? Because it's very unrealistic that smaller companies will have much cheaper access to energy. This is just not something that will happen in the next 10 years. If you look at, let's say, the construction of new solar power plants or whatsoever.
Yeah, a great question, because now we've been talking a lot about strategic orientation, right, of companies, and I think the operational aspects, like the footprint, right, the ecological footprint of a company is very important here. And in terms of energy management, there is a lot that can be done when it comes to AI. And actually, generally computing, it's the hardware, right, that has the biggest impact. So that's something we need to take into account. And it's also in terms of, so if you, for an iPhone, for example, roughly speaking, right, you have 80% of the energy used in the production and 20% by using items. But what that also means for companies, for every companies, that they need to invest more consciously in hardware. Then they need to keep that hardware for longer. They need to repair it, which means it needs to be repairable, right? That could be, I'm sure there could be AIs helping with that. And then this is about optimizing code, right? This is about balancing memory and processing, right, or adjusting that. And I think there's a lot of options that companies have. And in terms of service, right, so yes, location matters, but actually we don't have infinite locations. And there was even a case in Ireland, I think, where basically there was a data center was competing with a housing project, right? And who gets the power really was the question. So that is an issue. We don't have infinite amounts of power. I mean, clearly not, or energy in the short term. So location matters, but also time when you actually run your machines, right, matters. Right? I mean, the energy mix matters. So for example, if you are in Australia, your energy consumption would be 73 times as much as in Switzerland. So there are things companies can do, but I think just in the end it comes back to cost, because once this price of damage is priced in, companies will see the business case even more clearly, not just the really cool ones, right, that you've been talking about, that think 10 years ahead and that are in the lead and will be the successful companies of the future.
Thank you. I mean, just to put this into perspective regarding the energy consumption, if I would Google, what is an example, which book did Alice write? Let's stick with the stage. And if I would use the same one in ChatGPT as a prompt, the energy difference in terms of consumption is factor 1,000. So this is gigantic. And there was a study conducted by Google last year, like what are the drivers for energy consumption of large language models or AI in general, and how can you reduce it? And from the topics you mentioned, you can make the models, let's say, more efficient. That has, let's say, a 2x, 3x factor. Then when it comes to the data center, it's also, let's say, 1.5x. There's not that much efficiency to gain because the data centers are already very efficient. But by far the biggest impact was the location of the data center. So they compared this, like the training of a large language model, how much CO2 output would it generate across several countries. By far the worst one was Germany, because they compared the G7 countries. So the conclusion was that if your company is already doing, let's say, end-to-end CO2 accounting, you have to use a Google Cloud or AWS region from Norway. So at the end of the day, not everybody will be able to do that, because They have lots of fjords, but they don't have unlimited fjords. so new way of thinking will be necessary. So,
sorry, can I come in this? And I'm amazed that you remember all these numbers. I don't. But also, of course, companies like Microsoft are putting their service underwater, right? Which makes cooling easy. You need less energy for cooling, but then that heats up the ocean. And we all know, at least for sure, since the floodings in the last few weeks, that this then accelerates climate change. So bigger picture again.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we also do is, of course, we consult about green IT and how to optimize your data center consumption and so on, but we also look at responsible AI principles. And these are usually just best practices for developing AI. One of them is the Occam's razor. If you've been more technical, you maybe know that. So it says if you have two equivalent systems, use the simpler one. So we don't always need these big LLMs that are consuming crazy amounts of energy. Often the small specialized agents are enough. And if we can bring back this kind of principles that have been out there for good AI development and implement it into our development process, I think there's also another potential to just improve energy consumptions in our AI models.
Can I just say something on this? Because absolutely, right, smaller data sets. And I'm really glad that the field has really moved in a positive direction to an extent in the last few years, because this is now kind of known, right? Not everybody knows it, but it's something that, that's accepted. But actually, a few years back, it was what kicked Timnit Gebru, right, from the Google ethics team out of the company, because she, together with some other researchers, had published a paper which is now super famous because of the scandal. It's called the Stochastic Parrots paper. And all it did was, it pointed out that there's an ecological footprint of AI, and it actually said also that, we don't always need bigger data sets. Sometimes small is beautiful. And so I'm really glad that we have progressed.
Well, and I would tack on with that too. A lot of what I think the previous panels were talking about was the purity of the data. And I think in our business, we use terabytes of information from satellite providers. And if we just sum totaled it or averaged it and threw it back to our clients, it would be worthless. And so being able to really siphon off through AI what is good data, what's precise data versus the garbage that's getting sold by a lot of data providers is crucial. And if you don't have an ambitious person or somebody that really wants to understand this new science, it's really hard to figure it out because most of the businesses are really comfortable on the financial side, but now seeing the variables that sustainability brings in can either be exciting if you're adventurous, and obviously we're entrepreneurs, that's kind of what we do, but it can be really scary if you have a C-suite person who's super confident and wants to stay in their position doing what they've always done with bad data, to then come in with newer data, more precise data, and say, hey, all of this was either incorrect or less precise than it should be. So in one of the questions we prepped for, I think in the same line for this, is what can companies do to prepare for AI? And I think the first one is be comfortable with what AI is giving you, because it's giving you a lot better data processing than what you could only do with humans before. But there is a lot of resistance to that because often you have people that are super comfortable in their position, they're getting highly compensated for what they're doing, and they looked at the last 10 years and said, cool, I can do this. AI changes all of that into that uncomfortable middle where we really should be living to actually learn.
Yeah, it also doesn't help if your job is defined by having a problem in the company, and if AI gets rid of the company, yeah, do I need to finish the sentence?
You got it.
In terms of data efficiency, that would be a question to Benjamin, because I think this is a super interesting aspect, but it is something that is, let's say, slowly getting steam because of the inefficiency of large language models. But if you look at your customers, let's say 5 or 10 years ago, the common thinking was get as much data as possible, IoT, whatsoever, save it into the cloud. Question mark is like the Homer Simpson business model. And in the end of the day, AI will find something. Do you see that there are nowadays, let's say, new ways of thinking that you start to collect the right data from the beginning and in general end up with a leaner operation, both from the analytics and, let's say, after applying AI?
That's a very big question. I try to give a good answer to that. So I grew up academically and also professionally in the Industry 4.0 hype. So this is what you alluded to, IoT devices everywhere, and everybody started to create data, and then we'll see what we can do with it. And it turned out a few years later, 500,000 in hardware invested in a factory. Nobody really knew what to do with the data. And well, we're still there pretty much, but this changes. What is really the biggest limiting factor for us when we approach a new customer is getting hold of what they already have there. So this is a large integration project that we have to do, and we are very efficient with it, but nevertheless it's work too, because now, 10 years later, we think most of the time we know what we can do with all these sensors that they have deployed. So in our case, increased energy efficiency. Something that I think I want to add, which was not your question, but nevertheless it's interesting because this last wave of LLMs and language models, back when I did my PhD, I dreamt about algorithms that knew where they should be applied to, and something that can help a milling operation, worldwide. And I was always looking for this machine god that knew which algorithm to apply to what. And what now LLMs do is very similar to what I dreamt about. And just on this panel, the last one, the big limiting factor of we need domain knowledge from the engineers was presented as a problem. And it very much was. But today, just try out prompting not even a premium version of ChatGPT with any engineering problem that you have. Anything that you used to need to ask an engineer in a factory about. It's really, really good. So the ChatGPT presents you with a very good answer, and these engineers that you used to have to ask whether or not your machine learning algorithm actually makes sense or not, turns out they oftentimes are even worse than what ChatGPT tells you if you provide ChatGPT with the necessary meta information. But that's not too hard. You can just drop any PDFs that the company already has on their Microsoft server, and then ChatGPT will take care of that. And that's actually something that makes it even more interesting. So integrating with sensors that are already there, and then combining it with the context information of a given factory, and then just use language models that are already there, really is something that makes magic happen. So the results of that are amazing.
So before we come to the last round, anybody of you want to add something?
No, I was just thinking next year we'll have a panel on AI and jobs, right?
Yeah, with LLM moderator and 4 LLM panelists.
But no, we don't. Because whenever we talk about industry and the biggest challenges in Europe, it's Fachkräftemangel, the lack of proficient people. So you cannot argue that there are not enough experts in your field and then be afraid that AI is going to remove you from a job. Take one. But both is just cementing the status quo. So one has to be true, I agree. And I would argue that we have still enough to do for people that are real and acting in the real world and are able to talk to each other, even though we give all these really tedious, stupid, data-driven jobs to AI. It's not a problem that we have, but it's certainly some reaction that people have in their mind. So AI is taking my job now, and you really like your job so much?
It's terror.
It's the biggest fear, I think, other than other fears that perhaps are more justified. Can I ask a question to the audience before we come to the last round? Do we have time? I really wonder, I mean, you're here at an AI conference, but I still want to ask a question. Who in this room is a real techno-optimist, really hopeful and positive about the impact of AI? Okay, thank you. So I see a lot. Now, who is rather pessimistic, perhaps a bit worried about the impacts of AI on society?
So who's seen Black Mirror, basically?
Okay, so there's still a few people, and you're the brave ones, of course, right? Because at a conference like this, it takes perhaps courage to say that. No, but I think it's also important to realize that in general society, right, we have people at the opposite ends of the spectrum, and a lot of people in the middle. And we need to bring everyone in, and we need to make sure that everybody develops AI competence, right, to an extent. And we all, I mean, I need to continue to build my AI competence, and it's much harder for me, competence, because, you know, I'm not a techie by definition. But I think it's also, the importance is also, we can only make AI really good and really beneficial for the world if we don't leave it only to data specialists and IT people and so on, but if we include domain experts, right, and users, and really have diverse development teams, that takes a lot of the bias out, that helps with a lot of the other issues, including the green issues we discussed.
And here actually I see a big parallel to sustainability, which is both of them are these transformative topics that cannot be just led by the head of data, the head of sustainability, but yeah, we have to bring everybody on board, the optimists and the skepticists, to identify problems, know when to apply what, and leverage these opportunities.
Can I build on this just really briefly? Because sustainability in Austria and beyond has often been called CSR, corporate social responsibility. And it's still a concept we use, and companies have CSR departments or something of that shape and form. But I think now what we need is also CDR departments, right? And ideally they're actually integrated. That's why I'm sort of, building on your point. So CDR stands for Corporate Digital Responsibility. And the idea is that also in the digital space, companies need to take responsibility, and everyone, not just companies, of course, all organizations, for their societal and environmental impacts.
Well, I think this will work for the environmental impact because the governments across the globe mandate it. I think for the societal impact, this is very difficult to measure because, for example, there's this famous book, it's called Amusing Ourselves to Death, that was written in the 1980s, and it was actually a very precise forecast of what to expect if you have an abundance of media, and you have media everywhere. And let's say, he basically forecasted, the author back then, that each of us will more or less live in his own bubble and eventually in his own information reality, because there's just so much created. I mean, he made it back then at the example of cable TV, but you see this nowadays with social media, and then with AI-generated social media, it's very likely that in, let's say, 3 years down the road, every feed will not just be differently filtered, but even differently generated. And I think this is surely one of the open flanks you have as a society in total. This cannot and will not be solved on a company level, I think, because they have no incentive to do that. Think of Facebook and so on, or it doesn't matter which company actually.
Cool. The risks are significant. Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, big challenge. And of course, this polarization is also driven, right, by AI-supported models. I mean, they were there before, right? And I'm talking about fake news and election influencing and so on. But this is actually accelerating now. Yeah, so active influencing. Which also means companies mustn't always lobby against regulation.
We must not end this panel with a negative thing. We only have 4 minutes to go, so anybody should really come up with something positive to say now.
I have something positive.
You go, Nate, please.
But that was planned anyway. You took the words out of my mouth.
As a way to counter the skepticism, we are launching tomorrow. If you follow us on LinkedIn, you have the opportunity to nominate either a government, a city, a province, or a business, and we will do our service is free for them to let them hold up their own sustainability reporting versus what a satellite or a sensor can. So if you follow us on Floodlight tomorrow, we can actually hold up then that the data is winning out over just the rhetoric.
Love it.
I hope you can stay in Europe, because if you do this for corruption, you might have to leave. No, but fingers.
You already talked about Trump living in his own bubble.
Fingers crossed it will work out. Yeah, speaking of a positive note, what was so far let's say the most positive impact you saw in how AI is applied for cleantech or the green energy transition? You're not allowed to mention your own company.
I mentioned a customer of ours.
That's okay.
No, it's really nice to see industrial manufacturing is a very abstract thing, and it's for the past 200 years it lived from taking people away from what they actually manufacture and making them more distant to the thing that they create. And what we now see is that the people that work together with us for a few months, so yeah, there's a bit of advertising here. Once they really see how much they saved by changing the operation of the facility, you see this little spark in their eyes again, and it's pathetic, not, but Nate, you have to help me out here. Never mind. It's really nice to see the spark in the eyes of these people that have been working for 20, 30 years in industrial manufacturing plants. that haven't really been used to, or that are not used to that anymore. Sorry, I gave a way too long answer.
So I'll be quick. I'll use a very simple, maybe not the most impactful, but a really interesting aspect or example. IKEA is using basically cameras to in their restaurants to scan food waste, and that has, in the UK at least, reduced food waste by 50%, and has also, of course, saved costs. And something else that's positive, there's a green algorithms project in the UK, and it has a lot of calculators freely available for companies who do care about emissions, and lots of information. And also really positive, in this book, we really provide a balanced view of the risks and opportunities in various aspects, including climate and circular economy, but also social inclusion, education, the world of work. And then we look a bit at power and regulation and the military and things like that. So it's a positive balance.
Yeah, something positive I see is when companies go into this path of circular economy. It just reminds me now of one company there in the logistics space for pharma. They sent these tracking devices together with vaccines or so that have been shipped around the world. So far, they were just shipped somewhere, arrived there, and then disposed. Now the customer wants to have real-time tracking and makes the device more expensive to produce. So this company is now going to circular economy, and once this keeps on owning these devices, then it's organized that they get shit back, that they can be reused, that they can be recycled. They are on the journey there. They're not all the way to the end, but it's exciting to see this companies really embarking on this circular economy journey.
Cool. Thank you very much. And yeah, we will no longer stay between you and the buffet outside, aka lunch. Thanks for tuning in, and we meet again at 2 o'clock for lunch. And thanks, everybody. It was a very great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.